My name is Mary. For 40 years, I worked inside the court system, quiet and invisible. So when a young investor bought the house next door and turned it into an unhinged party venue, he naturally thought an elderly woman like me was an easy target. He stood on his driveway, laughed in my face, and told me he had lawyers on retainer. He was right about one thing. I couldn't stop him by arguing. But he made one fatal mistake. He forgot that the quietest people in the room are usually the ones who know exactly where the trapdoors are. Before he even realized a trap was being set, his lucrative business vanished, and he lost everything, without me ever raising my voice or leaving my front porch. If you want to see how an arrogant man accidentally handed me the key to his own destruction, make sure to hit that subscribe button right now. And before we begin, drop a comment below and let me know, where in the world are you watching this from, and what time is it for you right now? I spent over 40 years working as a senior administrative specialist for the county court system, so I know a thing or two about rules, order, and patience. When I retired at 65, all I wanted was a quiet life in my suburban neighborhood. My home sits at the end of a peaceful cul-de-sac in Willow Creek. It's the kind of street where neighbors actually know each other, trim their hedges on Saturday mornings, and wave when you drive past. For 3 years, my life was blissfully predictable. My mornings started on the porch with a mug of black coffee, watching the sunrise over my hydrangeas. My afternoons were spent tending to my garden, checking on my elderly neighbor, Arthur, across the street, and enjoying the tranquility of a neighborhood where the loudest sound was a lawnmower. I earned this peace. I paid off my mortgage in full and looked forward to spending my golden years surrounded by good neighbors and quiet afternoons. Then, the house right next door went up for sale. Old Mrs. Higgins had lived there for over 30 years before moving into an assisted living facility. Her property shared a boundary with mine, separated only by a low wooden fence and maple trees. It was a charming 3-bedroom ranch that possessed wonderful curb appeal. I hoped a nice family would buy it, folks who would plant a garden and care about the community. But the real estate market was heating up, and affordable housing was getting scarce. Within 2 weeks, a prominent sold sign appeared on the lawn. The new buyer didn't move in right away, which raised my first red flag. Usually, new homeowners arrive with moving trucks and excited kids. Instead, commercial contractor trucks began pulling into the driveway every morning at 7 o'clock sharp, blasting radio noise and disturbing the street. That's when I met Derek. He was in his late 20s, wearing tailored suits slightly too expensive for our block, glued to a smartphone and radiating aggressive self-importance. Instead of introducing himself, he stood on the lawn, barking orders at contractors. Curious about my new neighbor, I walked over to the edge of my driveway one Tuesday afternoon while he was checking his mail. I offered a warm smile. "Hi there, I'm Mary, right next door at 414. Welcome to the neighborhood." Derek glanced down at my hand before giving it a quick, limp shake. He didn't bother smiling. "Derek," he said flatly, his eyes already flicking back down to his phone screen. "Good to meet you." "Are you planning on moving in soon?" I asked politely, keeping my tone light. "We're a pretty quiet bunch around here, but we always like welcoming new faces." Derek chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound that immediately revealed his character. He slid his phone into his pocket and crossed his arms over his chest. "I don't live in suburbs like this, Mary," he said, tapping his shoe on the pavement. "I invest. I buy assets, upgrade them, and make my capital work for me. This house is an investment vehicle." I looked at the freshly painted exterior and the heavy digital keypad lock he had installed on the front door. A cold feeling settled in my stomach, but I kept my composure. "An investment vehicle," I repeated calmly. "So you're planning to rent it out long-term?" "Something like that," Derek replied with a patronizing smirk, turning back toward his house. By 7 in the evening, thumping bass echoed through my living room walls. The vibrations were so intense that the framed family photos resting on my side table started to rattle. I sat at my kitchen table, watching through the blinds as dozens of young adults spilled into the backyard. They blasted music, screamed over the noise, and threw plastic cups over my low wooden fence. The party didn't stop at midnight. It raged straight through until 4 in the morning. When I finally drifted off to sleep out of sheer exhaustion, I was awakened 2 hours later by the sharp sound of glass shattering on my driveway. When I stepped outside on Saturday morning with my coffee, my pristine front yard looked like a trash dump. Empty beer cans, plastic cups, and discarded food wrappers littered my lawn and hydrangeas. Worse still, a massive black pickup truck belonging to one of the party guests was parked at an angle, completely blocking my driveway. I couldn't even back my car out to go to the grocery store or attend my weekend routine. My 78-year-old neighbor, Arthur, walked over from across the street, looking pale and exhausted. "Mary, I didn't sleep a wink last night," Arthur said, his voice trembling slightly with frustration. The noise was unbearable. I called the non-emergency police line twice, but by the time a patrol car drove past at 3 in the morning, the officers just gave them a verbal warning and left. As soon as the cruiser turned the corner, they turned the music right back up. "I see," I replied, looking at the beer cans crushed into my flower beds. I felt a surge of anger, but I forced my breathing to stay slow and steady. Reacting emotionally wasn't going to solve this. "Did you manage to speak with Derek?" "I tried calling the number listed on his property records," Arthur said, shaking his head bitterly. "It went straight to voicemail. He doesn't care, Mary. He's making hundreds of dollars a night while we deal with the destruction of our neighborhood." I walked over to the pickup truck blocking my driveway, took out my smartphone, and took a clear photo of the license plate and its position relative to my property line. I then snapped photos of the trash scattered across my lawn and the broken glass near my tires. That weekend set the pattern for the next month. Every Friday through Sunday, our peaceful cul-de-sac turned into an unpoliced entertainment zone. Groups of 20 to 30 people arrived in rotation, bringing chaos, loud music, public intoxication, and disrespect for everyone who lived here. My quiet porch mornings were replaced by the smell of stale beer and exhaust fumes. My peaceful evenings were shattered by screaming guests jumping into the pool next door at 2 in the morning. Derek was nowhere to be found during these weekends. He collected his booking fees remotely while pushing all the collateral damage onto us. But as I swept the broken glass off my driveway for the 3rd Sunday in a row, I made a silent promise to myself. Derek thought he was dealing with helpless seniors who would just suffer in silence or give up. He was about to learn a very hard lesson about who he was actually messing with. On a Wednesday afternoon in early May, I finally saw Derek's white sedan pull into his driveway. The weekend party guests were long gone, and he was there inspecting the property, probably checking for damages before the next set of renters arrived. I knew this was my opportunity to settle things like reasonable adults. I didn't want an escalating feud. I simply wanted my peaceful neighborhood back. I placed my garden shears on the patio table, wiped my hands on my apron, and walked across the lawn toward his driveway. Derek was standing near his front porch, scrolling through his smartphone as usual. When he heard my footsteps on the pavement, he looked up, his eyebrows drawing together in annoyance before I even spoke. "Derek, do you have a few minutes?" I asked, keeping my voice calm, steady, and neighborly. "We need to talk about what's been happening here every weekend." He let out a heavy sigh, pocketed his phone, and crossed his arms over his chest. "Look, Mary, if this is about the noise, I'm already aware. The short-term rental app sends me automated notifications whenever neighbors submit complaints." "It's much more than just a minor noise issue, Derek," I said firmly, holding my ground. "Every weekend, 20 to 30 strangers turn our quiet cul-de-sac into an open-air nightclub. They block driveways, throw trash onto my property, and blast music until 4 in the morning. Arthur, across the street, is nearly 80 years old and hasn't had a full night of sleep in a month. This is a quiet, residential neighborhood, not a commercial event venue." Derek tilted his head back and smirked, giving me a patronizing look that made my blood run cold. He didn't offer an apology, nor did he show a single thread of remorse. Instead, he laughed, a short, condescending sound that echoed across the quiet street. "Mary, let me explain how the real world works," Derek said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "I own this property deed. I paid good money for this asset, and I have every legal right to maximize my return on investment. What I do with my property is my business, not yours, and certainly not Arthur's." "Your business becomes our business when your guests violate local peace ordinances, damage private property, and disrupt our lives," I countered calmly, looking him dead in the eye. "We've lived here for decades. We built this community. You can't just come in and destroy it for a quick profit." Derek stepped closer, towering over me slightly in an obvious attempt at intimidation, a tactic that might have worked on someone half my age, but certainly not on me. "Listen to me very carefully, old lady," he said, dropping his fake professional tone entirely. "I don't care about your garden. I don't care about Arthur's sleep schedule, and I certainly don't care about your opinions. I am making thousands of dollars every weekend off this house, and no retired senior citizen is going to tell me how to run my financial portfolio." He leaned in closer with a cruel smile. "If the noise bothers you so much, Mary, I suggest you go to the drugstore and buy yourself some cheap earplugs. Or better yet, maybe it's time you start looking into a nice, quiet retirement home, because I'm not stopping." He turned on his heel, unlocked his front door with a quick tap on his phone, and stepped inside, slamming the door shut behind him. I stood on his driveway for a long second, feeling the cool spring breeze on my face. My pulse remained completely steady. I didn't yell. I didn't bang on his door. In my 40 years working in the court system, I had seen plenty of arrogant men like Derek, reckless, greedy, and entirely blind to the legal traps they set for themselves. He thought my age made me weak. He thought my polite manners meant I was helpless. I looked at his front door, smiled quietly to myself, and walked back to my house. Reasoning with Derek was officially off the table. Now it was time to play the long game. I didn't waste a single second feeling hurt or angry after Derek slammed his front door. Emotion is useless in legal battles. Facts and documentation are everything. 40 years of organizing court files and evidence dossiers had taught me one fundamental truth: arrogant people always leave a paper trail. Derek thought he was playing a high-stakes game of real estate capitalism, but he didn't realize he was dealing with someone who knew every inch of the administrative system. The very next morning, I set up my command center at my dining room table. I pulled out a fresh yellow legal pad, a binder, and my laptop. My goal wasn't just to complain to the city. My goal was to build an airtight case that no lawyer could wiggle out of. I ordered a professional digital decibel meter online and downloaded a time-stamped camera application on my smartphone. Starting that Friday, my quiet investigation began. Every time a new group of partygoers arrived, I went to work like a court stenographer. I recorded exact dates, arrival times, and license plate numbers. Whenever the music started thumping, I stood on my property line, recorded the decibel levels on my meter, and took time-stamped videos showing the readout alongside the roaring party next door. The legal noise limit in our residential zone after 10 in the evening was 55 decibels. Derek's guests were consistently hitting 85 decibels, loud enough to cause hearing damage over time. When vehicles blocked my driveway or spilled over onto Arthur's lawn, I took high-resolution photographs from multiple angles. I kept a meticulous logbook with neat chronological entries. Friday, May 12th, 11:42 p.m., sound level 82 decibels, trespassing on eastern property line. Saturday, May 13th, 2:15 a.m., public intoxication, open containers on public roadway. Next, I turned my attention to the digital footprint. I located Derek's listing on Airbnb and VRBO under the profile Urban Lux Properties LLC. I screenshotted every single detail. The description advertising the home as a party paradise, the house rules that explicitly allowed large gatherings, the nightly rates, and the public review section where guests bragged about throwing wild birthday bashes. I printed every page, timestamped them, and filed them into my growing binder. On Tuesday morning, I drove down to the county clerk's office, a building I knew better than my own backyard. I sat at one of the public computer terminals and pulled up the tax assessor's records and public land registry for 412 Elmwood Court. I printed the original property deed, the parcel map, and the municipal zoning codes for Willow Creek. While reviewing the municipal zoning ordinance, Arthur called my cell phone to check in. "Mary, are you still trying to figure out how to stop Derek?" he asked, his voice sounding tired. "I saw you taking notes on the sidewalk yesterday." "I'm not trying to figure it out, Arthur," I replied calmly, staring at the property document on my screen. "I'm executing a process." In court, you don't fight noise with noise, you fight arrogance with paperwork. "Do you think the city council will actually do anything?" Arthur inquired.
They take forever to respond to basic maintenance requests. They will when I hand them a legal file so complete they won't have to do any investigative work themselves, I said. Derek thinks he's hiding behind an LLC, but every paper filed with the county tells a story, and I'm about to read his entire book. For 3 straight weeks, I compiled every piece of evidence, cross-referencing public records with my daily logbook. Derek thought I was just an old woman sitting on her porch. He had no idea I was building a trap brick by brick. By the 4th week of my investigation, I had collected over 200 pages of evidence, but I knew that noise complaints alone were rarely enough to shut down an illegal enterprise quickly. City bureaucracies move slowly when dealing with simple civil disturbances. To destroy Derek's operation completely, I needed to hit him where it hurt most: his bank account and his legal standing. I returned to the county clerk's office and pulled the public mortgage records and deed filings for 412 Elmwood Court. That was where I found his first fatal mistake. When Derek purchased the house, he secured a traditional 30-year residential mortgage under his personal name, tied directly to his LLC. To keep his monthly payments low and secure a favorable interest rate, he declared the property as a primary single-family residence. Consequently, the bank required him to maintain a standard HO3 homeowners insurance policy. An HO3 policy is strictly designed for owner-occupied residential properties. It explicitly excludes coverage for commercial activities, high-risk business operations, or short-term rentals without a specialized commercial rider. Derek had never purchased commercial insurance. He was running a lucrative, high-turnover rental business with 20 to 30 drunk guests every weekend, under a standard policy intended for a quiet family. If a partygoer suffered an injury or burned the house down, the insurance company would refuse to cover a single cent. More importantly, standard mortgage contracts strictly dictate that maintaining proper homeowners insurance is a mandatory requirement. If an insurance carrier cancels a policy for fraud or unauthorized commercial activity, the mortgage lender immediately places the loan in default, demanding full payment of the entire principal balance within 30 days. That was the first nail in his coffin. The second fatal flaw was even cleaner. I accessed the municipal zoning map for the city of Willow Creek. Our neighborhood was clearly designated as an R1 single-family residential zone. Under city code, running a short-term commercial lodging facility in an R1 zone required a conditional use permit, a public hearing, and a specialized business license, none of which Derek had ever applied for. Even worse for Derek, the city enforced a strict transient occupancy tax, a 10% tax on all hotel and short-term lodging stays under 30 days. Cities are ruthless when it comes to missing tax revenues. I checked the municipal revenue portal's public index of registered commercial operators. Derek's name and his LLC were completely absent. He had been collecting thousands of dollars in booking fees every single month while deliberately evading city taxes and operating an unpermitted commercial business right in the middle of a quiet residential street. Arthur stopped by my porch later that evening while I was organizing the final cross-references into 3 color-coded folders. He looked at the legal documents laid out across my outdoor table. "Mary, do you really think these corporate filings are going to make a difference?" Arthur asked, leaning on the railing. "He told you himself that he has a lawyer on retainer." "Derek has a lawyer, Arthur, but he doesn't have the law on his side," I replied smoothly, closing the last binder with a satisfying click. He thought he was operating in a legal gray area because he listed the property on an app. But an app doesn't override county zoning, mortgage contracts, or municipal tax laws. He left 2 massive liabilities wide open, and he doesn't even realize it.
I ran my hand over the 3 thick envelopes resting on my table. One was addressed to his insurance carrier, one to his mortgage lender, and one to the municipal tax enforcement unit. Derek wanted to treat our residential street like a cutthroat commercial business. It was time to show him what real corporate liability actually looked like. On a bright Wednesday morning, I walked into the local post office carrying 3 thick manila envelopes. I sent each one via certified mail, with return receipts requested and restricted delivery, ensuring they reached the exact desk of every decision maker. I wasn't leaving anything to chance or administrative error. When you want to dismantle an arrogant person's illegal scheme, you don't use emotional outbursts. You use the relentless machinery of law and procedure. The first envelope was addressed to the underwriting department of Derek's property insurance company. Inside was a bulletproof package containing my time-stamped video evidence of 40-person parties, decibel logs, screenshots of his Party Paradise Airbnb listing, and photos of structural hazards like open fires on the wooden deck. I included a cover letter citing the explicit terms of his HO3 homeowner policy, pointing out that he had intentionally committed material misrepresentation by running a high-risk commercial enterprise without a commercial writer. The response from the carrier was swift. 2 days later, my certified tracking confirmed delivery. Insurance companies despise unmitigated liability. Within 48 hours, they issued an immediate, non-negotiable notice of policy cancellation. That cancellation triggered the second line of my defense, the mortgage lender. Under the binding terms of his primary residential mortgage agreement, maintaining full continuous hazard insurance was legally mandatory. Without an active policy, Derek was in direct breach of contract. Along with the copy of the insurance cancellation alert I knew would hit their internal system, I mailed a copy of my evidence packet directly to the lender's risk management division. I highlighted his false declaration of the home as a primary residence. The bank acted precisely as corporate bureaucracy dictates. They issued a formal notice of default, warning Derek that unless he secured full commercial insurance or paid off the entire mortgage principal immediately, they would initiate foreclosure proceedings within 30 days. My final stop was Willow Creek City Hall. I didn't mail this packet. I delivered it in person to the Code Enforcement and Municipal Tax Division. I sat down directly across from Mr. Henderson, the senior code inspector who had worked for the county for nearly 20 years. I placed a neat, tabbed binder on his desk containing 2 months of documented zoning violations and calculated tax evasions. He's running an unpermitted commercial lodging business right in the middle of our R1 residential zone, Mr. Henderson, I explained, my voice steady and professional. He has failed to register his business, failed to obtain a conditional use permit, and has evaded the required 10% transient occupancy tax on every single booking since February. Mr. Henderson flipped through the binder, his eyebrows rising higher with every page of financial records and time-stamped photographs. "Mary, this is one of the most thorough documentation files I've ever seen from a resident," he said, shaking his head in disbelief. "He hasn't paid a single dollar in lodging taxes, and he's operating completely outside municipal zoning laws." I calculated the unpaid transient taxes and penalties based on his public listing rates, I added calmly, pointing to the summary spreadsheet. The city is losing thousands of dollars every month he stays open. "We'll handle this immediately," Mr. Henderson said, closing the binder firmly. Unpaid city taxes and commercial zoning violations carry mandatory daily fines, and we don't take kindly to tax fraud. I walked out of City Hall into the warm afternoon sunshine, feeling a deep, quiet sense of satisfaction. I didn't need to yell at Derek, argue on his driveway, or scream over loud music. The legal and financial machinery was now grinding into gear on 3 separate fronts. As I drove back to my peaceful cul-de-sac, I checked my rearview mirror and smiled. By the time Friday evening rolled around, Derek's comfortable investment scheme was about to collide headfirst with reality, and he wouldn't even see it coming. By Friday afternoon, the dominoes I had set in motion began to fall with precision. A large passenger van filled with weekend partygoers pulled up to 412 Elmwood Court at 4 o'clock. But before they could even unload their luggage, 2 municipal code enforcement cruisers and a marked police car pulled up directly behind them. I stood on my front porch, holding a warm cup of Earl Grey tea, watching as Mr. Henderson and 2 officers approached the group. They informed the travelers that the property was under a mandatory cease and desist order for illegal commercial operations and unpermitted lodging. The guests were instructed to pack their vehicles and vacate the premises immediately. 20 minutes later, Derek came tearing down the cul-de-sac in his white sedan. He slammed on his brakes, jumped out of his car without even shutting his door properly, and rushed toward Mr. Henderson with his phone raised high. "What on earth is going on here?" Derek shouted, his face red with anger. "You can't trespass on my property or kick my guests off my land. I have rights." Mr. Henderson didn't flinch. He handed Derek a thick packet of official enforcement documents stamped by the city and the county court. "Mr. Vance, this property is in direct violation of Municipal Zoning Ordinance R1, Mr. Henderson said in a calm, authoritative voice. "You are operating an illegal commercial lodging facility, evading city tax collection, and creating a public nuisance." As of 3 o'clock today, an emergency stop use order has been issued. Derek stared at the paper in his hands, his arrogant composure crumbling in real time. "This is absurd. My lawyer will have this thrown out by Monday." "You can take that up with the municipal judge, sir," Mr. Henderson replied flatly. "In the meantime, if anyone attempts to occupy this home for short-term rental purposes, you will face criminal trespassing and contempt charges. Furthermore, the city tax authority has assessed back taxes, interest, and daily administrative fines totaling over $35,000. Derek stood frozen on his driveway as the officers taped an official yellow cease and desist notice directly across his front door. He looked toward my porch, realizing for the first time who had orchestrated his downfall. I met his gaze, took a slow sip of my tea, and offered him a polite, slight nod. He didn't say a word. He just got back into his sedan and sped away. The financial reality hit Derek like a freight train over the next 2 weeks. Without insurance, his mortgage lender officially declared his loan in default, invoking the acceleration clause that demanded full payment of his $400,000 balance. Combined with the city's tax penalties, daily zoning fines, and lost rental revenue, his speculative real estate venture was completely destroyed. He didn't have the liquidity to pay the bank or fight the city in court. By the following month, the property was put back on the market under a forced lender-approved sale. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, the sun cast a warm golden light across my hydrangeas. Arthur walked over to my porch, carrying 2 cold lemonades, and pointed toward the yard next door. A real estate agent was pounding a fresh for sale sign into the lawn, this one explicitly marked as a traditional single-family residence. "It's so peaceful again, Mary," Arthur said, taking a seat on the porch chair beside me. "I still don't know how you managed to pull all those levers so fast." "It wasn't magic, Arthur," I said with a gentle smile, listening to the soft rustle of the maple leaves overhead. "Arrogant people always believe they're above the system. All I did was show the system where to look." I leaned back in my chair, enjoying the quiet breeze of my neighborhood, knowing my home was a peaceful sanctuary once again.